Welcome to Spirit Outspoken, where we dive deep into the realms of spirituality, healing, and the beautiful chaos we call life. From ancient traditions to modern practices, we are going to explore it all. Whether you're a newbie or a seasoned seeker, you're guaranteed to find something that inspires, challenges, and intrigues you here. So grab your favorite beverage, find a cozy spot to curl up, and join us for Spirit Outspoken. Hello and welcome to another episode of Spirit Outspoken. Today we are thrilled and honored to have with us Lenora Lemke, our first official guest ever on the show. And we are delighted to have Lenora because Lenora is a somatic psychotherapist, which many of you have probably never heard of this before. I know it's a relatively new concept for a lot of people, which is why we are even more excited to have her on so that we can share some wonderful information about something that really could be incredibly useful to people in their healing as they go along. So welcome, Lenora. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, nice to be here. Thank you.
So Lenora, what's really interesting and fascinating about you is you have such a wide array of incredible experience. So can you just shed some light on how you got into this line of work and what you did before that kind of led you down this path?
Sure. I actually started out as a personal trainer. And in my work, I realized that to be the best personal trainer I could be, I needed to know about health, nutrition, psychotherapy. There's just so many aspects of personal training. And so I started to study each modality. And one of the things on my list was psychotherapy, because sometimes when people are trying to eat right or exercise, there's some kind of an emotional block, or I wouldn't even call it an emotional block, but there's something that gets in the way. And I just knew that I needed more training to help people through those blocks. And so I wanted to study psychotherapy, and an opportunity just presented itself. Well, first I studied nutrition and became a holistic health and life coach. And that helped me with the nutrition part of it and the lifestyle part of it. And then the psychotherapy, I was living in California at the time. And I had 3 clients who were all psychotherapists all at the same time, which is really unusual as a trainer. Lucky if I have one person who is. And so that was a coincidence. And one of them happened to go to the somatic psychotherapy school that I ended up going to. And so she was telling me all about it. But even before that, before I had that conversation, one of my clients who was a therapist, I was just sharing with him how I was reading this book about how the body and mind connection. And after reading that book, I was realizing and working with my clients, I do a posture screen on everyone and I help them through their issues in life. A lot of times I do life coaching as a personal trainer also. And I was just seeing that what I see in their posture and their movement and their physical issues often correlates with their personality. And I was saying to this therapist, isn't it interesting how you can almost predict someone's personality based on their posture and their movement and what their body is doing? And he said, oh yeah, that's called somatic psychotherapy. And I was blown away. I didn't know there was anything that existed that actually connected the body and the mind like that. So he told me about the California Institute of Integral Studies that has a program. Actually, there's 2 schools in California where I lived at the time that have a program where you can actually major in somatic psychotherapy. So then I thought, well, there it is. That's what I've been looking for. I've been wanting to incorporate psychotherapy, and it's such a great bridge between the 2 worlds because you're working with the body and the mind and emotions. And so that's how I added that on to my work. Yeah, and that's where it all started.
I don't think we've actually said, but for people who are totally new and unaware of this concept, what exactly is somatic psychotherapy?
Oh, yeah, that's a really good question. So the word soma is actually from an old Greek word that means spirit-filled flesh, as opposed to corpus, which is dead flesh. So it's alive flesh. So it means your body, but the aliveness of your body. And that's what we work with. So that's what somatic psychotherapy is we work with that aliveness inside of us. And there's so many ways to work with it. It's hard to really condense that. But say I'm with a client and my client is talking about something, I might see a little shift in their body. And that I would call that a somatic. I'm being aware of the somatic signals that this client is giving me. And so I might pause them and say, what just happened there? Did you feel something there? And they might say, oh, yeah, I just started to feel a little tingly in my chest or tightness in my chest. Then I would say, well, let's be curious about that. Why don't we stay with that and see what happens? And if we do, it might lead to, like, one person once said, like, when I think about my boss at work, my back gets tight. Oh, isn't that interesting? So your body can actually give you signals that you're feeling something or something's here, or maybe there's an old trauma that is being triggered. And that's like a link into your unconscious mind or a link back to something that could potentially be healing, because your body will tell you. You'll see, this is something hard to teach people, but my clients will see for themselves through experience that when they feel something in their body and we just stay with it and are curious about it, it leads to something really valuable that they really need. And our bodies have a way of showing us what those things are that we need, even when we're not conscious of it. Did that make sense? I don't know if I
I
explained that well.
love I love this idea. Like,
Yeah.
and one thought I just have is so often I feel like we are also disconnected from our bodies. We're
Mhm.
so up in our heads
Mhm.
that we really don't pay enough attention to what's going on. And those sensations really are messages from
Mhm.
within trying
Mhm.
to communicate something.
Right. Even depression is a signal that something's happening. Like, it could be, oftentimes depression is a protective mechanism where their body is shutting down so that they don't need to feel something that could be overwhelming. So it just shuts the whole system down. And I know I'm oversimplifying depression, but just as an example, or if somebody has a fight or flight response that may not seem like a good feeling to want to feel. And it might be, people often try to shove that away and not feel it. But that fight or flight response can be a memory from the past when you were a child or teenager or at some point in your life where a traumatic event happened, and that event has never been healed. It's never been resolved. And so that trigger is actually a gift. It's saying, like, oh, here's a window in to something that needs to heal. So I think whatever we feel is good, even if it doesn't seem comfortable or good, even if it seems like something's wrong with you. A lot of clients will say there's something wrong with me. And I would say, no, that's your body is communicating something important. Let's just see what your body is trying to share.
And I love that too, because it helps take the fear out of it. Like, to so often too, we have those sensations. And like you said, we just want to run from them or avoid
Mhm.
them, escape them. And so I think it's wonderful and a very unique message to be like, no, let's just be curious and let's sit with this
Mhm.
and see
Mhm.
what unfolds and what it can tell us. So is it too, am I oversimplifying if I say the goal is to essentially allow yourself to just feel the feeling or feel the trauma and work
Mhm.
through it and let it like kind of flow so you
Mhm.
actually feel it and can release it? Is that kind of
So,
the
yeah, that's a good question. Like, what is trauma really? I really believe that trauma is anything that's unprocessed. And
okay.
then our bodies will store the things that are not processed. And they store other things too, but no, among them, the things that are not processed, our bodies will tell us through the triggers that we have. So the goal would be to allow the body a chance to fully process. And by process, I mean to feel, to experience, to make sense of all those things that there just wasn't time when the trauma happened or when the difficult situation that never got processed happened. Those things never got resolved. It might help to give an example. I'm thinking of has happened to many clients. If there was some anxiety or some anger between people in the relationship that never got resolved, if they sit with that, there might be a trigger of like tightness in their stomach, and maybe even some GI issues happen because that's never been resolved. When a person sits with that, especially in therapy, when they have that support, it might start to shift. And then like in one person's example, their whole body became hot. There's all this energy, and then it would maybe shift up into their head. And then as we talk through it even more, things start to fall together and they make sense of, oh, I actually felt this way. I never realized I felt this way. And then right then it just might move out because everything was processed. Like, they made sense of it. They felt all the feelings they didn't know they had. And once they can experience everything in a way where they can digest it and process it, then it's finished and it just moves out of you. And oftentimes health issues I don't want to get everyone excited that every health issue can be resolved this way, because I do think we need medicine and we need to take care of our bodies in a physical way too. But sometimes certain issues do resolve just because the stress of carrying that in our bodies leaves. So our body isn't constantly having to spend energy on that unresolved issue, and it's not carrying around the stress anymore.
Do you find that certain health issues tend to be more related to emotional stored trauma?
I just went to a workshop a couple weeks ago with some cutting edge research on the link between the body and the mind. And this researcher studied PTSD, and more than 99% of all, if I'm remembering right, it was almost everybody in the study who had PTSD had GI issues, had digestion issues. Almost everyone did. So that says a lot that, that we're when we go through trauma or through any stressful events, we're carrying, it's hard on our bodies. Studies that show that it changed our microbiome. So the gut bacteria shift based on our stress.
Isn't that insane? Like, my mind just is blown over that. So I think, Lenora, we shared with you that this season is all about emotions and different perspectives on emotions. I'm curious what your take is on what emotions are in the body. Like, like, if your perspective, like, what would it be? Or is it a thing? Is it an energy? I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. I think you'll get different answers from many. If you talk to other psychotherapists, I think they'll say different things. Have you seen the movie Inside Out?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I think of emotions in that kind of way. I see them as parts of ourselves, and I see them as very important parts of ourselves. So, for example, fear keeps us safe. Like, we need to know what the threats are so that if there's any threat out there, we're careful and we think about it and we take precautions. Anger comes up when our boundaries are violated, and we need to either have a boundary, or it comes up to tell us when something's not fair, when something needs to change. Sadness is a way to let go. It's a grieving process. So I see it as, and I don't know if I'm right. I mean, or even if there is one right way, but I see it as basically it's who we are. It's our spirit. It's parts of our spirit, parts of our aliveness. And we have lots of different parts of ourselves. And they all have good messages for us. They all have something important to share. So it's important to listen to them. And that's the point of the first movie, right? Is like, why do we need sadness? Like, why she just slows us down, and it's uncomfortable and can cause us to feel depressed. But it showed us that we can really feel deep connection with others, and grieving draws us closer and helps us to let go of things. So, yeah.
I just felt that. That made me want to cry. Like,
you guys see my goosebumps?
I know. I felt, speaking of somatics, I felt that right here.
I know.
Lenora, that was more than I bargained for. That was such a beautiful explanation of what emotions are. I feel that deeply. I mean, that really connects, I think, especially what you said, that they're parts of our spirit, right? And they're messengers. There are things that can say, what might need a little bit more attention, and what might need a little bit more focus, and that we don't have to fear those strong, heavy emotions, because Rachel has been very open on the podcast of, being an emotional stuffer, just like stuffing away. And I tend to intellectualize emotions. Well, why, if I can prevent this feeling next time, then I won't have to deal with this, and I will outsmart this a negative thought, and just spend all my attention in hypervigilance and avoidance. And that's just exhausting in and of itself, right?
Right.
So kind of welcome them in as, welcomed neighbors and friends as part of like your community. It's a different perspective. And I think we'll sort of destigmatize some of the things that people are really afraid of when it comes to these heavier emotions. And that will pave way to quicker healing, quicker peace, joy, And for so long and for so many generations, and especially we talk about like our culture a lot, right? That there are certain emotions in our culture that maybe people weren't allowed to feel, or emotions, some are positive and some are negative. And we just don't want to talk about those, or those are the ones we push through and ignore. And I think this is so beautiful of they all have purpose, they all have a message, and they are all equally important. And so exactly. It reminds me. So I had Jason and I both meditate, and I have had a lot of loss. And I was doing this meditation one time, and in it, I very clearly saw this man like come up and sit in this chair directly across from me. And immediately I knew it was grief. And I immediately started looking like everywhere around. And I kind of this notion of, I know you don't like me. I know you don't even want to look at me, but I'm here to help you if you'll let me. And it was just like this profound moment of, I need to sit with this.
Right.
And feel it, allow it to move through.
Mm-hmm.
That's why what you said connected so deeply, that this is all important. These are all so important, and they help us in some way, shape, or form.
And that's how I see healing, is reconnecting with parts of ourselves that we have not been able to connect with or felt bad about, like shame. If we have shame around certain parts of ourselves, they get disconnected from us. Therapy is one way to reconnect with that, because when you feel something, just like you said, instead of pushing it off, like just inviting that in and seeing what's there and trying to reconnect with that. And honestly, it's not the emotion. I have clients that are afraid to go into sadness because there might be so much grief, they'll never pull themselves out of it, or they'll be so afraid that they'll feel helpless or completely, their bodies might just give out. And honestly, it's never the emotion that causes the issue, it's our defenses around it. It's the fear of having the emotion, or it's the shame that comes up with the emotion, or it's the protective part of us that fights us to try to not let us have that emotion, that protective part, like if it's dissociation or if it's intellectualization, where we get caught up into our thoughts. That's what's uncomfortable. That's what makes things difficult. But if we just lean into the emotion, and it's not always that simple, of course, it helps to have a therapist to help you navigate that. But just to simplify it, that's really all it is just reconnecting with our true spirit, all the parts of ourselves that are real and true.
Oh, so beautiful.
I have a question. Like, who comes to you? You know, like, are these people that have, been to more traditional realms of therapy, like cognitive therapy or psychotherapy, right? That don't necessarily focus on the somatic aspects. Who's stumbling upon Lenora?
I think it is mostly people who have tried therapy before. They've tried talk therapy and they get so far and they need something more. And so they hear about somatic therapy and they would like to try that. And talk therapy helps a lot of people and is good enough to resolve many things. And I'm simplifying, saying that talk therapy is all in your head, because it's not all in your head, but it's more when you're talking about things, it's more, we're using the verbal way of processing, and it's more logical, intellectual. But our wounds are not always just in our minds. They're also in our bodies. They can be nonverbal, especially if they happen to people who were nonverbal. Like when you're 2 years old and something happened, then of course it's all somatic, because there's no way to really process anything verbally at that age. And then our emotions often are nonverbal too. When something happens to us emotionally, it can really help to connect to that emotion and heal that emotion through somatically instead of verbally. And then also people with trauma, often people are told right away or read online that somatic therapy is known for people who have trauma. And some people come right away to somatic therapy because they've read that. And that's because trauma is stored in the body. So it's really hard to resolve trauma without working through the body.
I think you have 2 more patients.
I know. I'm like, also, I'm coming to see Lenora.
I know. I'm like, what else is in there? Pneumonia had to come out.
I know. I just sort of like shake it out.
It's like, tipping you upside down and like, it's come out of your pocket. Like all the trauma falls out.
Exactly. Do you have anything that you feel is really beneficial or important that we haven't touched on yet?
Yeah. Like, what have we not touched on that you think would be really important for other people to know about somatic therapy?
So we can work with the body in lots of different ways. So the way that I already shared is just more like a mindfulness type of way where you just stay with whatever you feel, whatever sensations you feel. But you can also work somatically through movement. Sometimes I'll have people, this is more of a Gestalt method, but when people are having like a relational issue with somebody, we might have them have a conversation with that person in their imagination and have them go across the room and sit in another chair and imagine that they are that other person. And so they will talk as if they are that person. They'll take on their body posture. So even just taking on someone else's body posture, and kind of actors know about this. I'm not an actor, but I've been told that it's very similar in some acting methods where you just embody the person. And then there's something that happens. You just get this intuition and empathy that comes as if you're kind of becoming that person and you're speaking from that place. And so that's one way to work, is to take on different postures. And you can even do that with yourself. Like you might have the part of you that feels angry, and you can take on the posture of when you're angry and speak from that place. And you can take on the posture when you're sad, and you might feel more smaller, droopy, and speak from that place. And just feeling that energetically what happens inside of you when you switch from one part to another can be really enlightening, because it says like, oh, this is an aspect of me and I feel really different. And then when I shift my body, I feel different too. And I can do that intentionally. I can actually shift how I feel based on what aspect of myself I'm connecting to. So that's one way to work. There's different modalities that use eye position. So brain spotting is one of them that I use. There's also EMDR. But when you have a feeling or a memory, you can feel that sensation in your body. That's the somatic piece. And then you can look left, right, up, down, and you can find a spot where you feel that even more intensely. And that eye position helps you access that sensation in your body even more, which speeds up the processing of it. So eye movement is one way, and looking left and right can help. That's an EMDR, can help process things more quickly. There's also gestures, like if somebody was in a car accident, their arm flew back like this in the car accident, I might have them slow down and just have them go very slowly in that motion. And right when they hit a spot, they might feel the trigger or something. So you can use the memory of your physical movement as a way in to the wound or the trauma, as the way to access the healing. And there's many more ways too, but those are some of them.
You mentioned a trigger. Is it always physical? Like, how do you identify like that correlation point between the physical manifestation of the trauma and the trauma?
Oh, okay. So for my clients, they actually usually aren't aware when the trigger happens. So that's one reason it's really helpful to work with a therapist. But there always is some kind of physical manifestation of it. So there might be, if someone's becoming angry, there might be like a up energy or like a forward leaning or like a more aggressive kind of look. And even if it's subtle, it could just be the tiniest little thing. But I could stop them and just say, are you feeling anything in your body? But oftentimes people just act out and don't even know they're feeling anything because it's unconscious, because they kind of go back into that wound, like that way of being where the wound happened, where the trauma happened. And they start acting it out without even knowing that they're doing so. And they often don't even have a memory of it afterwards, because when we are triggered, it takes us into our wound. And when we are wounded, during that time that we're wounded or when the trauma is happening, we switch from the frontal lobes of our brain, which are where our conscious, our logic is, our empathy is, our ability to know what's going on. We go back to our limbic brain. That's the more primitive brain. And when we're back there, we don't have as much consciousness. So it's really hard to know when you are triggered. But then sometimes we do know, because like our heart will start beating. So, oh, there's something there and I can feel that. Or you'll just get fidgety, or you'll feel restless, or maybe you feel shut down. Whenever you feel bad in any way, it's probably a trigger that it means there's something there that needs to be processed.
I think what you just said is so important and really highlights the need for a therapist, right? Because, if you think about going through, well, I just thought of this interesting example. I remember when I was like 8 months pregnant with one of my kids, I slipped on the sidewalk. It was icy in the winter and I fell hard. And all I could think about is this swirl of anxiety and stress that something's wrong with baby. I get to the hospital and my knee is like gushing blood and I have no clue. I have like
Oh,
no clue. But it's like this, what you're explaining and like why it's so important to seek the help of a therapist is because we can't self-reflect properly when we have a storm of emotions going on and we're trying to process our own trauma, either consciously or not. And then we're having physical manifestations. It's really hard, even if you're aware, like, oh, I feel that, to make the correlation and then to take the proper steps to work that through, I think is, really why somatic therapy is so compelling, right? Because you can be as aware as you can possibly be, but
mhm.
to be able to take the steps from awareness to understanding to like healing is
Right.
such a journey that people on their own are probably carrying around trauma that is manifesting as significant physical ailments.
Mhm.
And, it's hard to identify and work through that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the definition of trauma is it's not processed. And if something's not processed, how can you even be conscious? It's really hard to be conscious of it.
Yeah.
And so even therapists have therapists. In fact, my school required that we had 50 hours of psychotherapy before we could become therapists because we all have blind spots. We all have our wounds and things that we're not aware of. And I think it's a lifelong process to become aware of our triggers and our wounds.
So how can people find you?
Oh, I have a website. It's my first and last name, lenoralemke.com. And there's a contact page there if anyone has questions.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And we'll link all of that up too. So it's really
Yeah,
easy
for
for
sure.
everybody to find. We'll include that in
Oh.
the show notes and include it in any of our social media because I just think the
Mhm.
world needs to know about you. You're
Oh,
so
thank you.
True.
You're such
I
a
think so.
valuable resource. And I just, so excited about the possibilities
I
for
know.
everyone with this. I mean, it's
Mhm.
so incredible. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Lenora. I just think this is going to be so helpful to so many people. What you said was just beautiful and eye-opening. And I think just the awareness alone of this being a tool and resource for people will be incredibly helpful to a lot of others. So as we wrap every week, we like to do some type of beneficial resource guide. And this week, Lenora has graciously volunteered to provide us with an experiential exercise to allow you to start working through and experience some of these somatic things at home on your own. So check it out on our website. We'll also link it up on social and stay tuned for next time. Thanks for joining us for today's episode. If you're ready to take your spirituality to the next level, be sure to check out our website, spiritoutspoken.com. There you can download free educational resources, read our latest blog posts, and join the Spirit Outspoken community.
And don't forget to follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Spirit Outspoken to stay up to date on news, happenings, shenanigans, and all things Spirit Outspoken.